Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So hello, good afternoon everyone. Yeah. So just a brief introduction about myself. Yeah, I'm Sita Subramaniam from IBM. I, at, I actually have 23 years of IT experience overall, and almost 15 years plus I was in the banking and trading sector, and the key banks that I worked with was Amex and Deutsche in New York, and a Standard Chartered Bank in Chennai, and almost I traveled across the globe for the implementation of the banking solutions for Standard Chartered Bank. And from the banking arena, I have switched over completely to IBM data security. And so I get a lot of transition about the key critical data that we normally use, say in the payment sector, and then how important it is, like, to protect the data, and what is the kind of risk exposure that we see in our critical data. So the topic of it today is about the risk part. So how we are going to do the risk management. So I'm going to give a conceptual idea about the risk management framework. Basically, the product that I'm supporting in IBM now in the data security space, it's again, it's a data risk manager. So all we are talking about is about the data risk. So first of all, when you talk about the data, we need to know how critical the data is. What is the real crown jewel of the data? So in the previous topics that was covered by the earlier people, like they were talking about the threat intelligence and the cognitive space, cloud, everywhere predominantly thing is about the data, wherever it is. So the crown jewel, what is a crown jewel means it's a very sensitive part of the data. How do you identify that whether the data is sensitive or not? So for example, like you all are already familiar, I heard that you are all familiar with all these databases, right? Typical relational databases like Oracle, Sybase, Postgre and all that. So in all those databases, if you have some sensitive data, so for example, like if you have some credit card information, or in the payment industry, you must be having all payment related information, and the customer holding some payment data. So those kind of information, there will be huge data in the database. So how will you identify that these are all crown jewel data? So for that, like, we need some means. So IBM Data Risk Manager, it's broadly it is doing a risk exposure. Say like for the typical credit risk officer, if they wanted to see the IDRM data risk manager dashboard, immediately they can see whatever risk is there in that particular infrastructure where the data is held on that infrastructure. See, if you are seeing a lot of databases, that databases are hosted in that infrastructure, right? So those databases are vulnerable. We were talking about those vulnerabilities and threats. So based on that, we calculate the risk. So that risk, how well it is interpolated in the dashboard, that is what IBM Data Risk Manager is doing all about. So here in this space, first of all, there are two phases to it. Phase one is like data discovery and classification, and then phase two is data protection and monitoring. So in the phase one, even in the earlier talk, Nalini was talking about like PII data, some personal information data is there. So how will I first of all identify that data? So first of all, you need to scan that databases and figure out a metadata. So here we are talking only about the metadata. So we are scanning that metadata, and then after that what? Like now I need to classify the data. So whether it is PII related information we have, or there is some customer related information or an employee information, those kind of information we need to classify. So again, for classification, like we have set of policies. So there is a policy management module in Data Risk Manager. So here you define a policy, and then based on the policy will be obviously having set of rules. So those rules it will define like which table, like which particular column like we are going to classify. So say suppose in this entire gamut of this database, I want only the credit card table, employee information, or some customer related information. So you can create a policy in such a way, so you, only those particular data will be tagged, and then you can classify that data. So once the classification is done, then what next? So then see, almost in all these data that we are talking about, say if you take a particular healthcare industry or a payment industry, it is an organization. Obviously the organization will have a lot of say business processes and of course applications. There are a lot of applications that are running. So the three key things that we are focusing on here is about the database, application and business processes. So with these three things, like we have a specific template. Based on that template, like we characterize those particular asset. So the asset is nothing but the group of data that we have classified and kept, right? That we call it as a information asset. So that information asset, it can relate to a particular application or it can relate to a particular business processes. So there are different characteristics to that information asset. So that is what is interpolated in the Data Risk Manager dashboard. So once we have an asset in the dashboard, now that asset will relate to a specific infrastructure. So that data would have come from an Oracle database or in a Sybase database, anything of that sort. So with that infrastructure, now I need to calculate the risk. So moment I see the asset on the dashboard, I need to know like whether is there any specific crown jewel data resides on that particular asset. Let me just quickly go to this slide. So far like we talked about this data. Whatever that I am talking about is about the risk associated with that data. So that data can be on the cloud as well, and it can be a structured data or an unstructured data. So it's a database related data, or it can be some files. See, there are a lot of industry that we are talking about. healthcare, education. So our product mainly, like we are focusing on this healthcare and financial, and we have seen in the, almost in the, all the people who have talked about, we know we were mainly targeting about the attackers who break through every day to get at the sensitive data. There are a lot of attack types. Even Sulakshan, when he was talking about, like he was telling a few attack types. So mainly I will go directly to this crown jewels. So this crown jewel is nothing but a very key sensitive data, most critical information, that only we call it as a crown jewel. Here this is what I said, a chief risk officer, a CRO, if he wants to look at the dashboard and evaluate and find out what's the risk exposure to that particular information asset, they can do that using this IDRM. Mainly here we are focusing on the information or data risk. So mainly this IBM Data Risk Manager, we use this IBM Critical Data Protection Program. It's like CDPP. So here your main idea is, like, first you have to define. So first when you have say when we approach a customer, first of all we ask them what are all the key data that is residing on their infrastructure and what are all the critical crown jewels, and then now we have to discover those data. So just they must be having the data scattered across different infrastructure. So how will you identify that and do a native data scanning, and first you discover the data. So the moment you discover the data, and you have to have some measures, right? What is it that is required? Like we need to protect the critical data. So how we are going to protect the critical data? And then we do secure. How well you secure that data and keep monitoring the data. Yeah. So in this I can tell you one quick example. Say our product IBM Data Risk Manager, we can say it is a integrated platform. It talks to many other IBM products, say like QRadar. Say QRadar, from QRadar we will be getting the offenses. There must be already some attacks on the endpoint, and QRadar has some threat intelligence, and they have identified the threat and then created an offense. That feed will come to the IDRM. So we take that feed and then we calculate the risk. So that must be, that endpoint can be an infrastructure also. It can be the holistic, the completely the platform where your application is hosted or your infrastructure is hosted. So that way we get the feeds from QRadar. Another one interesting example is IBM Guardium. See, the Guardium is used basically to monitor and protect the data. So we use extensively Guardium. Guardium has some key policies, say like database monitoring policies. Say for example, access rule. Say suppose if somebody is accessing a particular credit card table in a database, and then I have an access rule in such a way, moment I access that credit card table, immediately an alert is sent from the Guardium to IDRM. So the moment an alert, we call it as an incident, moment an incident hits the IDRM, there will be a lot of incidents hitting IDRM, since the connection is established between Guardium and the Data Risk Manager. So the fully it is a database activity only on the IDRM. You will be classifying the data, discovering the data, and then getting the information asset to the dashboard. Yeah, the governance dashboard. So in this entire gamut of that process, there will be a lot of database activities involved. You will be constantly triggering some SQL queries or getting at to the database. So, the moment you get some specific triggers which actually relates to that particular rule, then you will immediately get an alert from Guardian. So, those kind of lot of incidents come from Guardian. How will we know that it's a real threat? So, that is where from IDRM we create a threat based on the time frame. Say like Monday to Friday, like we constantly look at all the incidents coming from Guardian, and then I'm defining a particular threshold. Say in this particular threshold, say if I have some 50 incidents during that time period, because whatever policies or rule that I define in Guardian, again it is highly critical only. Already in the policy itself I will mention that it's a high, medium or low. So, so we know that there is some sensitive information that that particular person is trying to tamper with. So, that way like that particular threat will be created based on that time frame. So, the moment that threat gets created, our server, IDRM server, constantly poll for those incidents, and moment that threat definition that gets satisfied, a threat gets created. And then just like, have you heard about Resilient? It is another platform. It's more of ticketing system and whatever the action management that you do based on the resource activity. Say, suppose if a threat has been identified, and then somebody has to remediate that, right? So, for that I have to inform somebody in the organization. Say, few people, few resources, because normally there will be limited resources available on the security arena for remediation, planning and mitigation and all those. How will you do a planning for that? So, for that I have to assign this particular threat maybe to a resource. So, the moment threat gets created, and then in IDRM, like we have a module called Action Center Management. So, in the Action Center there are different projects, activities and tasks. So, this by default it is a database remediation project. So, that will get created, and then there will be list of activities and tasks, which for that we use a template and we provide to the customers a standard list of activities and tasks. So, the moment this project gets created, we can go and assign a particular resource for that activity. Say for example, like I am saying for the database, there are, let's take the same example, we have created the threat because some credit card data that somebody has tampered with. So, we need to, from the details, we know which user has tampered with that particular data. Here in this case, like already the damage has happened. So, now that is the difference between a threat and a vulnerability. See, vulnerability, the futuristic, say maybe there may be a database patch available. So, that way like you can, there are say for example in the Intel and all, there are a lot of fixes available. So, even recently like we had this Spectre meltdown vulnerability for that in the Intel chips. So, moment the Intel give the fix, then that vulnerability like we can fix it. So, that is the difference here. But in case of threat, already the damage has happened. Then how we are going to mitigate that? So the data risk manager is totally like our key selling point is about the risk remediation, the total risk modeling. So how well we calculate the risk score, and the moment see the risk score in the risk part, like I can say there are 5 steps. So first of all you have to identify the risk, and then you have to basically understand what the risk is about, and then you have to assess that risk. Then how well we are doing a risk evaluation, and then you keep monitoring these risks. So we are not stopping on risk monitoring, on the risk evaluation. After risk evaluation, then you keep monitoring and find out whether is there any other preventive measures that we can take to evaluate the risk. So this is what totally like I am talking about. The risk and mitigation, the IDRM is all about how the sensitive and valuable data is there, in which location it is available, and who are all the key stakeholders, and what are all the controls and protection measures that we are using. And mainly these are all for risk mitigation, like what kind of controls. So for example, like if you take the GDPR, the compliance, so like that there are more lot of framework coming up, ISO. So each one they have the specific framework, and how do we adapt to that? Say suppose the data should be compliant, GDPR compliant means, so like the PII data specifically we have to adapt to that PII data. So how well we are going to adapt that? So in the data risk manager we have an assessment module, so that actually it helps to do the risk assessment. So basically like using some few questionnaires. So there are a lot of questionnaires that are given to the users, so they can answer. Based on that, like we are here doing the assessment, risk assessment, and then doing some risk scoring as well. And then after that only, like for that particular information asset, we apply that risk score. So for example, like we can say the key thing that we talk about here in the data risk manager is about the data. It's a confidentiality, integrity and availability. Yeah, so basically these 3 factors, this is the key risk factors we consider it to evaluate the risk for in that particular information asset. So and also like the category of the data, like what kind of categorization that data holds. And then this of course this CAA, these kind of attributes add value to the risk evaluation. And also one more thing, in the previous Nalini, when she was talking about, like you were asking about this metadata. So here also like we are more focusing only on the metadata. Even in the earlier demo when I was doing with Cognizant, so they were asking if you are doing only on the, focusing only on the metadata, what about if there are lot of data available in that table? So how will we consider that? Say possibly the encryption of that data. So even like I can go ahead tamper that credit card information or employee information. I have access to that particular data. Then of course I can see all this data. See, here we are not talking about the content of the data. That is why like in the next talk Mahesh will be talking about the encryption. So here like we are not talking about that encryption part of it, So only we are considering the metadata scan. See, for this risk, again this metadata, you can ask a question like, if it is only the metadata, so like how will you evaluate a risk? Say, suppose if I am saying my risk factor, it's considering based on this infrastructure, I am having this many data assets. So I have a lot of data assets percentage that I have calculated, and in that like I have like credit card data only 5% of it. So if I have some algorithm internally, then I will say, okay, it is not at risk because my data asset percentage is only 5%, but really that information is at risk. It is a sensitive information and it's a crown jewel data. So for that we introduced a thing called row count. So there, even like I can use that row count, and suppose if I have huge data available in that, then that will take into account. So that way like I can consider this credit card data also, even though the data asset percentage is 5%, but it has lot of actual data. So that way it is more important and it is at risk. So these kind of factors only we are considering and evaluating the infrastructure risk and then the asset risk. See, there are two kinds of risk. Here mostly we are talking all about the databases, structured data as well as files, unstructured data. See, both structured as well as unstructured, as I told you, from Guardium we have a database activity monitoring. There it using that policy, access rule policy, like we can create a rule there, and then the moment the rule gets installed, and if we trigger some query, an alert gets generated from Guardium. Same thing about the files also. Files, we have file activity monitoring in Guardium, and then for the file activity monitoring also, in whatever file server, the infrastructure where all your files are stored, like we can create a FAM policy there in Guardium, and again when you install that policy, and if you access the particular file, say if it is a HIPAA sensitive information is there in one of the files. So then if you access that particular file, or if you try to modify the file, immediately you will get an alert, and that gets into IDRM, like we capture those alerts, that file alerts, and then interpolate that alert in the risk dashboard. So this is what ideally we are doing in the IDRM. This is the overall flow with IDRM that I can say is mostly I talked about this IBM Guardium. We are tightly, I mean, I can't say it's tightly coupled, but for now, like for getting all this database related alerts as well as file alerts and doing some vulnerability assessment, it's an integrated platform. So we use IBM Guardium for as an integration platform, and as I told you, we do this discovery and classification of the data, and then integrate that and move it to the dashboard. More or less, overall, how I can say about IDRM is like model, manage and govern. See, the model is basically, as I told you, there are a lot of policies involved, like you can create your own policies or you can use the policies from Guardium, and there will be, naturally there will be a lot of set of users, so there will be user definitions, and those kind of activities will go into the model. And then moment in manage, then we have to say once you have this data identified, and then we have to do some scanning and we have to apply those policies and classify the data. So those comes under the manage part. So basically on the risk officer's point of view, they will be considered only about the governance overall on the dashboard. So all this background activities, when it gets done, and moment you integrate all this data, and again moment you classify the data, I mean by triggering a scan and get the data classified. After that you need some attributes to the data, right? That is why I said we use some standard templates, say like database, application, and business processes. So those kind of attributes we relate to that particular information asset, where it is coming from. And then in the one of the database template sheet itself, I will be providing like which location this data is residing at. So that infrastructure, where it is located, and this gives a pictorial view of the dashboard also. We call it as a splash page, where in the splash page, like we often talk about these vulnerabilities and the threats, say like where it is coming from. Already we know in the dashboard this infrastructure is located in such and such a place from this country. So we are showing a map in one of the left quadrant. Sorry, I am not able to show you the demo because of it's an on-prem app, like, so we are not able to show you that demo. But when you can visualize the 4 quadrants, like in the first quadrant, like you will be shown a map. Like moment you click on that particular country, then it will display your incidents and vulnerabilities, and then your top 10 assets in the dashboard. Say like in the 3rd quadrant it will show you that, and then the top 10 assets from your line of business or your business line of business or application. So based on that you will it will filter out the top 10 information assets. And then vulnerabilities, say if you want to see the trend, say the past 6 months you would have had some vulnerability. A typical example is like say you run a vulnerability scan on an Oracle platform, see, and 100 data sources. That means 100 different databases. Like I have done a vulnerability scan, and I have identified, say, like around 50 critical vulnerabilities across this platform. And moment I got all those 50 critical vulnerabilities, and then, like as I told you earlier, like based on that critical vulnerabilities, immediately like I can do a risk remediation on those vulnerabilities. Similarly, just like a database remediation project, based on the vulnerability results, like I can filter only those critical vulnerabilities or major vulnerabilities or low level vulnerabilities. You pick up those vulnerabilities and then associate a particular activity or task. In this case, like you can like in the earlier the database part, the system itself will create a database remediation project. Here in this case you are given an option to create the activity and tasks and all that. You can choose it, and then you can assign the resource also, and that will create a project in itself. It's a risk remediation project, and the moment the risk remediation project is there, as I told you, say in this same case, there are 50 critical vulnerabilities. So after 6 months, say, on that same 100 set of data sources, somebody from the database administrator, they came and they applied some new patches on that. And then if you trigger the scan again on the IDRM platform, now all the 50 critical vulnerabilities are resolved now, and that, so there are no vulnerabilities now. So if I want to see the trend in that past 6 months, so that kind of trend we show it in the splash page. So that way, like, we know what is the vulnerability trend across the organization. And we are trying to build in a few things where it's not only the vulnerability that is coming from Guardium. So we can have some endpoint vulnerabilities from QRadar, and there can be some application. If you provide a URL, like you can find out the vulnerability using AppScan. And there are like other platforms, because IDRM is mostly an integrated platform. It integrates with other products as well. Say like Splunk, Qualys, and all these products, again they are all vulnerability related products. So we can do an endpoint, or only there are 3 kind of vulnerability scans that we can do, either on the database. You can use Guardium, or it can be Imperva Scuba, a direct competitor for Guardium. So again, then the application scan, that is AppScan, and then we can use QRadar for the endpoint, QRadar, Qualys. So we are trying to get all these vulnerability information from all threat vectors, I can say. We can call it as threat vectors, and all these feeds we are getting from different platforms, and then based on that, like, we are interpolating the risk in the dashboard. So maybe you can ask a question. So few products like QRadar, they have their own inbuilt risk manager also. They calculate the risk, but we are interested only in picking up the vulnerability feeds from QRadar, and we have an inbuilt risk engine in IDRM, where we are using the algorithm inside. That portion of it, we call it as risk analytics. Inbuilt risk analytics we are developing. So that way, that risk engine will run in the server every 15 minutes, and then it will look for these potential threats or vulnerabilities, and then calculate if there are any risk on that infrastructure, or the asset is nothing but it's part of that infrastructure only. So if there is an infrastructure risk, that is the base for your asset risk, then naturally our asset will fall under that risk category. But then how many percentage of it, what's the kind of risk score that you can provide to that asset, we can use that assessment module and link this. For now, it is a standalone module that we have in our product, where this assessment is like using questionnaire. You do the risk assessment, do the risk evaluation, do the risk scoring, and those things are all independent as of now. We are planning to integrate that with the dashboard, so that if you provide this information asset to that assessment module, it will do the risk assessment, it will evaluate the risk, and then it will provide the risk score. But for now, we use internal algorithm to do that. So that is what this whole slide is all about. I said about the policy definition, classify, and then the CMDB, this is what I told about the templates. that application, business processes and database. That is the thing I am talking about, the business context. This is the basic data driver for IDRM. So based on that only we are, I'll show you the sample dashboard in the next slide. That is how we are arriving at. And then the risk modeling and configuration. So we do that risk configuration now basically based on that vulnerabilities and threats. Like we do configure that risk. So how many threats, whether it's a critical threat or it is a medium one or it's a low, based on your threat definition as well as your vulnerability scores that you have already got from Guardium. And this is a little bit old view of the risk dashboard, governance dashboard, but the overall there are a lot of changes to the dashboard now, but eventually it will look like this. The main component here is the assessment, that information asset portfolio, and then infrastructure, and what are all the consumers, like different applications and processes, and the notifications and tasks. So immediately when you log in, say if I am logging in as Sita, and then so for me somebody has assigned like this activity should be performed, that I have to perform this activity because there is a risk remediation project, and like I have to go through this process. There are some few critical vulnerabilities. Then moment I log in, immediately it will show me those list of activities and tasks. In the real time environment there will be specific tasks. So if you are a specific resource, you know very well what to do with that database, or some patch is available now and you have to apply that patch or wait for that. So based on that your activity time also will differ. So that is one thing. And then about the stakeholders. So again the stakeholders, we will be giving it in your the template itself, like who are all the key stakeholders, business owners, application owner, or the technical lead. So those things we will be showing it here. And then we have a model, a diagram also, like how well we are going to show to the business user the complete enterprise architecture, the complete flow of it. You can pictorially, I mean, you can show it. I mean, the data flow diagram, how the data is flowing, so that eventually we have a component called the modeler. So using that modeler, like you can just take each and every component. Say like we have this infrastructure, and then the asset, and then the application, the business processes, and then some stakeholders are there. So we can put all of them together, and then how well the data flows for this particular organization, that we can pictorially do it in the business context and data flows. So this is the overall thing that I talked about: model, manage and govern. This is the entire architecture of this IDRM. As I've told in a very simplistic way, but eventually there are a lot of intricacies to the, say like policy management, central, what are all the different kind of policies. I didn't dive deep into that. Say like I told you mainly that we integrate with Guardium to get more of this, since more the topic is centered around the data risk. So eventually we integrate with Guardium now to get those vulnerabilities, and using the database activity monitoring policies, we used to get the incidents from Guardium. That's why I talked more of Guardium. So, but we also have the native part of it. Even if a customer don't have a Guardium at all, then they still can do a native scanning, and we can create an IDRM itself. They can create the native policy. So, for example, like they can create one typical use case I can tell you is like we can create an unstructured native data source. Say a file is situated in some infrastructure, and we have the file server. There you have set of files. So, I know the path where the files are. So, I am creating a data source. Here we call it as a target. So, a file is in that particular target. So, that way I have created a data source or target, and I am doing a scan. Again, for scanning, like I have some policy created. Say policies I can use a typical regex, regular expression I can use. I want to look for some HIPAA keyword, or if I am having that Amex card, and if I want to use that Amex card data. So, those kind of policies I use, and I classify that unstructured data, and then take it to the dashboard, apply all the attributes, and then move it to the dashboard. Moment an unstructured data is there on the dashboard, and then we can use the FAM, the Guardium's FAM, and use that policy, install it, and get the FAM alerts into IDRM. So, mainly the FAM, it requires all about the policy and the rule that is installed, and then moment it hits the IDRM, then IDRM can map. Now it knows. So, say this particular policy, it gets satisfied, and then a similar kind of policy you install it in Guardium as well. So, you know that same Amex card related data or a HIPAA sensitive data, you just deploy it in Guardium as well. So, that way when it sends an file alert to IDRM, that way we can map that to that same unstructured asset that we have moved it to the dashboard. And then after that we can do a risk scoring for that. But for now, an IDRM, like the risk evaluation, mostly we are now focusing on the structured data. In the later releases, we will be including the unstructured part as well. So, in this overall architecture, have any questions? So, it's more about dealing with the data and how well you identify the sensitive data, classify them, and then protect it. See, in the protection part, like again in Guardium side, like we have an exception rule also. So, for example, like you have logged in to that particular database, but you are trying to tamper, just logging in, you don't have access to that, but you have logged in, unsuccessful the 3 attempts. So, that we can track it using the exception rule in Guardium. Moment you get that alert, then we can tap it in to IDRM, then that way like we know. But these kind of incidents, these are all, that is the difference here. This incidents, it has already happened. So, that is where we are taking the mitigation of it, the risk mitigation. So, in both the cases, it is like we are considering that as a risk, because how well we are doing the risk management on those, it differs. So, priority, it is like given to those incidents. That's why even in the splash page you can see those incidents or threats will be seen in red. It has happened already, you just have to do something about it soon. See, vulnerabilities at least, okay, we have some time, but again we have some critical vulnerabilities, so you have to act upon it. You have some space on that. So I just wanted to give you a glimpse on the product as such, the data risk manager on the risk perspective. And then this slide mostly I am talking about the holistic approach, very conceptual framework. So why is it that risk framework that is very much essential to the business overall? That is why this is the most key selling point for our product also. See, the data classification, there are a lot of other products in demand, like, okay, we can do some classification. So, but how well, like, we can do the risk interpolation. There are a lot of feeds coming from different different threat vectors, different threat feeds we are getting. How we are going to calculate that risk and give a feel to that particular CISO or the risk information officer. So, like, the moment at a glance when you look at the dashboard, he can come to a conclusion, okay, this is the kind of thing that we have to act upon. So, that's how important it is. So, that is the concept point of view, like I wanted to show you this slide. This unified risk management is nothing but it's an advanced analytics solution where they are focusing more on the existing threat intelligence. Already like we are having this threat intelligence because a lot of feeds that are coming from different products. As I told you, typical example is QRadar. They have their own built-in intelligence and they are calculating that offense, because there are a lot of attacks happening in different endpoints and they are capturing everything in QRadar, and then they also have a set of rules. So based on that rule, like intelligently, like they are creating an offense. Already they said it's a threat, and then they are giving that feed to us. So that's why we are calling it as an existing threat intelligence. So, but on top of that, like what kind of risk framework that we can use, how well we can strengthen the organization, as I told you about the technology assets and the business processes. How well we can strengthen those processes. If you manage that risk framework very well, and then using this existing threat intelligence and having some internal algorithms, so like we can get to evaluate the risk. So the three key things in this part is risk. First, what I can say, it's risk mitigation. Risk assessment, and then risk mitigation, and then risk evaluation. First of all, you have to assess the risk and what are the different approaches that we are using to mitigate the risk, and then you keep evaluating the risk and monitoring it. So that way, if you can apply some other different approaches, say for the risk mitigation, maybe that you can strengthen it, or your assessment itself can be wrong. So maybe you have to strengthen your risk assessment as well. So this will be a vicious cycle. It is a continuous process, these three things. So that is why I'm saying, like, the key characteristics of this risk-based approach. Here, I'm saying it is integrating the information security into this enterprise architecture and the SDLC life cycle. So that is where we are getting into, and I'm giving more emphasis on this control measures. And what is your assessment and monitoring? What are all the different control measures that you are using? And then that is what is all about this risk management. So this risk management, how well we are using all these three processes, this risk assessment, mitigation and evaluation. So mainly we use any risk framework. If you take, there will be a common risk executive. Like, you basically use a function that is a main group. Based on that only you link all these risk management activities to an organization. And then, as I told you, like, the key thing is about confidentiality, integrity, availability, and I can also say an accountability. So these are the main characteristics of this risk-based approach. And if you use this, it also encourages the use of automation to increase the consistency, effectiveness and timeliness of security control implementation and functionality. Moreover, the main thing is, to senior leaders it gives a credible information moment at a glance on the dashboard. So this is what I want to talk about, this enterprise-wide risk management. So three-tiered, there are multi-tiered approach to this risk management. And so here is, if you relate to our product, like say DRM dashboard. So I told you all this information asset, we are taking it to the dashboard. It's more of the application, business processes, all on the business context, on the organization. And also the information, how well the information is flowing, and that tier 2 is also involved. And basically your information system, what is the key operations that we are following. Okay, that's a three-tier approach on the risk management. See, the strategic risk and tactical risk is nothing but how well you are planning this risk. Whether it can be a long-term plan, that will be your strategic risk planning. It will be all in your risk assessment and mitigation. When you are doing that, how well you do the planning. It can be a short-term plan or it will be a long-term plan. So that is what here I'm talking about in this slide. Yeah, this slide I just used this probably to give a glimpse on the conceptual risk framework. So there are a lot of other things available in the market, but all are trying to use this unified risk management approach. So overall, if you see here, this you can relate to the DRM. Say all your assets are there, your technology assets, and then your business processes and applications are available, and the criticality assignment, that is what I told you about, the different attributes that you assign to the particular information asset. So there are like the CIA and then about this different category, and maybe it's a crown jewel data or it's not a crown jewel data or it's a row count, those kind of assignment, different risk factors. You can go on add lot of risk factors to it. That way you have a good control over the risk measures, how well you can evaluate the risk. So that is what here we are talking about in this slide. And about this comprehensive risk awareness, here what I am talking about is like this particular unified risk management approach. When you do this risk assessment, or if you do the risk monitoring, like how you will calculate the likelihood of event. Some things are very quite uncertain, right, whether it will happen or not. So what are all the different while you are planning itself, you would have taken say here there are a lot of things that people use. Some people use that Monte Carlo simulation, some probability distribution, and then what if analysis. So these kind of things will give you an idea like how you can arrive at those kind of risk evaluation. And then we should prioritize your risk mitigation also. So everything we won't be doing it at one shot. So there will be some priority associated to your risk mitigation. And then that the cost involved, you should justify your remediation also, right? You can't do everything. Yeah, I'm going to remediate this, for that I need something. That is where you need more planning on how well you are going to get at these activities. So this unified risk management, say overall advantages that we can think about is, it will assess the operational impact, and you can simulate the risk scenarios. And the key thing is you can visualize what are all the cyber risk and how you can manage the business risk. All boil down to your how well you do the risk planning. And in the planning, it will constitute the overall say what I said about those three processes: assessment, mitigation, and evaluation. So in our DRM, now in the data risk manager, we have assessment as a separate module in itself, and then overall flow that I talked about, how we get different feeds from different platforms, then that we consume it, and then we take it and do the risk scoring. Now internally we use our own algorithm and do the risk analytics, but future we are planning to integrate that assessment module, so that that assessment module can pave a way to all these concepts that I talked about, where you can do all this risk evaluation. Now in the Cognizant, one person was asking me that like you are just assigning an attribute, you have been allowed to choose some value there. You are saying your application is not impacted much. I am giving some organizational attribute low. What if it's not really so? You are under a very pathetic condition. Then that means your assessment module should give that reasoning out. So that is where the importance lies in this integration of this both assessment and the risk evaluation, which we are doing now. It's a more powerful topic. It's more about the risk. I'm talking about the data risk part of it. So once you, kind of experience and use the particular system, and as the other speakers pointed out, like if you are using the cognitive or cloud security, you start using the application and tend to get the pulse of it, then you can appreciate the value of what the risk is about. Thank you.